But one of the hats I have is in what's called the Idea States Pediatric Clinical Trials Network, which has a number of professional development resources, and we're building more through that network. So I just wanted to let you guys know about what's going on over there. So the ISPCTN, the I is for Idea States. So it is, which we all know, but just for people viewing this, the Idea State funding is run through NIGMS. It's congressionally mandated for certain states, the ones in blue on the right, to support biomedical research, increase competitiveness for funding. It enables clinical and translational research that addresses medically underserved communities, and those funds are earmarked for Idea States. But one thing to keep in mind is that programs and resources developed in Idea States are broadly available. ISPCTN addresses those states, but it's not funded by NIGMS. So it's an IDEA program in name. I put the grant number up there. That's the Delaware site. The ISPCTN actually does work in those states, but the funding can be spread around a little more across non-IDEA states. So it's an IDEA program, but it's out of the Office of the Director. That's what the OD stands for in the grant name. It's associated with the Environmental Influences on Child Health Outcomes program at NIH. And it addresses disparities in pediatric research, especially addressing kids from rural and underserved populations and developing clinical trials, in particular, multi-site clinical trials in IDEA states. And there are 5 key outcomes. These are linked to the ECHO key outcomes, including pre, peri, and postnatal, so that's pregnancy and birth, upper and lower airway, breathing problems, obesity, neurodevelopmental problems, especially brain development and motor development, and then positive health, sort of well-being broadly. So those are the 5 areas of focus in the ISPCTN, trying to develop, or we're developing. We're still early on in the ISPCTN. So we'll be going for the 3rd, ISPCTN 3, soon. But we're developing clinical trials. So far, Delaware has participated in 4 ISPCTN trials. These are all, it's all pediatric, so you'll see names up here that are from Nemours. I Am Healthy, which is an app-based interactive program. Move Up, which is vaccine uptake. Vidora is vitamin D. And then Act Now, which has to do neonatal opioid withdrawal syndrome. So those are either run through directly, they're run on pediatric populations in its clinical trials, so that's either Nemours or Christiana. So the one you may have heard most about is the Act Now. The intervention was Eat, Sleep, Console. That was that paper, the first paper, one of the big papers came out in New England Journal in May. And there were press releases all over the place. And it was done in conjunction, the ISPCTN worked in conjunction with the Neonatal Research Network and the HEAL, which is Help End Addiction. Ooh, I should have memorized what the L stood for. Sorry to the HEAL folks. But it was a consortium group that looked at implementing Eat, Sleep, Console intervention, which turned out to quite significantly reduce hospital stay and need for medication in opioid-exposed infants. So that came out in May, and that had a big splash in the press. But that was an example of a clinical trial that came up through the ISPCTN. All right, so I'm happy to answer questions about how all this works going forward in the talk. But what ISPCTN provides and what includes resources that are accessible in Delaware are mentoring and development of pilot proposals. So to run a multi-site clinical trial, especially in an under-resourced area or in places, IDEA states where that kind of thing doesn't happen very often, we start pretty early. So there's concepts, there's development of initial pilots, there's sometimes a qualitative assessment of the intervention, then finally the intervention. So the trajectory, which everybody knows, the trajectory to get to a clinical trial is pretty long, but ISPCTN helps along the way. We have working groups in interest areas, and on the right, you can see participation by the folks in Delaware on those different groups. So as PIs, Judy Ross and I are on the steering committee. She's carrying the lion's share of the load for that kind of work right now, but that'll shift. And actually, we're going to bring Lee Fan on, who I think a lot of you know. There's a publications and presentations committee. I co-chair the professional development committee, the DEI and task force, and I think CJ is actually on. She's co-chair of that. PPE, Dave Paul's co-chair. The Airways Working Group, Aaron Chitticle is part of that. Lee Fan co-chairs the Obesity Working Group. The Neurodevelopmental Working Group, both Judy and I sit on. You can see the list there. And Abby Strang. And hopefully you recognize a number of junior investigators or junior shifting to mid-career investigators from Delaware that are very active in ISPCTN. That QR code will take you to the Delaware site. So it just has some information of how we're set up in Delaware. The network itself has a hub. The data coordinating center is in Arkansas at UAMS. So the main hub is in Arkansas. We're one of the spokes out, and there's 18 of the IDEA states have sites within them that help with coordination and sort of the overall work of the network. All right, so a couple ways, a couple things that I would like to inform you, a couple things you can do to interact with us in the ISPCTN. One is that there's accessible professional development content now, pretty accessible. I think we beta tested it a bit, and I think the links are now working. But on the right-hand side, you can see categories for content that's available through the ISPCTN professional development group. Let's see if I can switch over quickly. Oh. So I'm now live on the site. I can't actually figure, I shouldn't admit this in recording, but I can't figure out how to log out once I'm logged in. I just wait for it to time out. That's an odd thing to admit, but basically I'm usually logged in here. But if you go to this site, you'll see something a little bit different in the header here, which will include a professional development content only. That's just takes you right to professional development. I don't think they're tracking. You don't have to have a login, for example, to the dashboard to use the content. But once you get there, you see the same thing that I do, which is here. And these are currently being kind of curated and organized, and we're trying to identify specific subsets. There's lots of information here, not quite as much as we have for the GIN in the state of Delaware, but think the same kind of level of information that's here. It's very much longer tutorials and education. So you can pick a topic that you're interested in by going into that professional content only, and hopefully this works. So I'm just going to click on, we just did a responsible conduct of research. So this will then drop down. So there's 7 talks under that current curation for RCR, including your choice of what you want to take a look at. Again, we'll get some of the curation will be, we'll have better indications for who's the specific audience for these talks. This is a CME linked or CEU linked talk. So in fact, you can get CEUs. The goals of this particular presentation are listed, and then there's course content below. And it's pretty obvious, if you want to start the course, you just click to begin. We're working on, through the Delaware site, especially since we're one of the first states to push this information out to CTRs and other individuals in our state that aren't directly funded or supported by ISPCTN. We're working on ways to track a little bit who's using, at least going through the portal and accessing information, but that's not set up yet. So right now you're on your own, but you're welcome to take advantage of these offerings that are available. So you can see this is actually fairly old, so I don't know how much longer we'll keep this. I just randomly picked this one accessible. But then you just start going through at the end. If you want CEUs, you take the assessments, and I'm not sharing the audio, but those resources are available broadly. If you try to use them and you have trouble in particular, or you like them, or you feel like giving us feedback, which I hope you would, if you could let me know, and Julianne Ross know what you found. Link didn't work. This doesn't make sense for us in Delaware. It's really old content, anything like that. I would love to see it. We're desperately going through and kind of reviewing and curating all of this information. All right, so that's one thing that folks in Delaware can use. Back here. Okay. The second thing we're developing, and I mentioned this before, are training pathways, roadmaps, especially, again, this is clinical trials in particular, interventional clinical trials. So for some of the INBRI folks, this might be a bit of a reach, although if you're interested, you should start taking advantage of the resources. So this works. Right, so there's a training guide. It is heavily Nemorsized right now. But the reason I'm showing it is once we get this up and running, and that's no small feat, the idea is that we'll push it out so that we can adapt the content to other sites, both within the state and within the broader 18 institutions that are part of the ISPCTN, right? So if you scroll down here, this is examples of what you would need to do and resources to get those things done. Right, so the prerequisite training for us at Nemours, if you click that link, it'll take you to the prerequisite training with some initial kind of orienting information, and then whether it's required training, and then for us, links to where that required training is done, so that you can link to it. Once the backbone's built, which is based almost completely done, if we wanted to say use this at UD, and I'm not saying we're going to, but I haven't talked to them yet. So that might be a surprise to anybody at UD. But if we want to use this at UD, it really is changing the wording, which is easy. And then the target, like how you get to your required training, the target site would be completely different. In fact, UD has some very strong web pages. So these things might point to very simple places at UD. But the idea of the roadmap, and then subsequently we'll work on some other more focused, self-guided tools like this, is that the individual can do it on their own. And you can point an individual to these resources as part of their onboarding, initial mentoring, or if the person is just interested in how they might get started in clinical trials, the idea is that they could come here just to get a roadmap for what's necessary. Right. So that link is for beta testing reasons. There is a link. Once it's fully published at Nemours, I'll come back to this group, and actually I'll talk to some of the other offices at the partner institutions about whether or not we want to move this or implement it in other sites. So the first thing is for people that aren't at Nemours, how would you interact with Nemours? Same framework, except they might be pointing at different things, right? So if you're UD and you're collaborating to do clinical trials at Nemours, your training would have to be UD, but everything else about the orientation, what you need to do, sort of the responsibilities, the principal investigator and the study coordinator, all of those are the same if the study is going to be done at Nemours. So this is coming soon. And then finally, for ISPCTN, I mentioned we're starting to work on the competing renewal, which is a few years away still. But one of the things for us is that we have a pipeline of clinical trials ideas coming through ISPCTN. So we can talk about those in the next iteration. You think big funnel. We have a lot of ideas. We're going to figure out which ones to support. Oops, accident. Which ones to support early, which ones to support later, and at what level. So even if you have an idea for a clinical trial, if you've already done a pilot, if you've already got, in sort of a previous investigation, you have a single site and you're interested in doing multi-site. And I think I mentioned this all the way at the beginning. You're thinking about doing clinical trials. We have a REDCap survey to start capturing that information. So we'll reach out to you based on filling this out and try to figure out where you stage currently in that trajectory for ISPCTN. And where we might be able to include the ideas going forward into a competing renewal. Because keep in mind, because it's pediatric, it has to be pediatric. So if you have an adult trial that you're trying to figure out how to implement in a pediatric population, we'd love to talk to you. And it would have to involve the pediatric hospital, right, at Nemours in the Nemours Children's Hospital in Wilmington. But no matter what, if you have an idea, even if you're not sure how all those pieces will fit together yet, we want to hear the idea. You'd be surprised. We don't want you self-selecting out. And in fact, we don't turn anybody away. We just sort of stage that's too early or that's not. If you have a device that you want to test in a multi-center trial and you don't have an IDE yet, then we can't. I mean, that's a different trajectory to go get an IDE, or if you've got some, if you're working with a company and you want to implement multi-center, you need IND. So there's some bifurcations to the pathway, but we do want to know what's coming, and we want to know how we can link people together. Clinicians at Nemours, for example, have similar interests to investigators at UD for clinical research. So do let us know. I'll share this. I think I can upload this talk into the chat, and then Aaron or Julianne can grab it. So the links are all embedded in there. All right. So that's ISPCTN and some of the ways that you can interact with ISPCTN at the Delaware site. And I am happy to answer any questions anybody might have. But thank you very much for your attention.